So thank you very much for staying with us. Welcome back. My name's Gareth Evans. It's an honour, a privilege, a pleasure to be in conversation with Maysoon now, following her remarkable film. I'd like to thank the Garden Cinema, particularly George and LaBeija, for making this screening possible. When we were talking together, Maysoon and I, about marking a preview of this film, and with the timing of the film's production and its earlier success at the British Independent Film Awards, where the cast won the Ensemble Award, as we will all rightly think they deserved. We were becoming very aware, of course, of the 20th anniversary of the invasion of Iraq, which started last night, the 19th of March, and obviously saw its first full day today, the 20th of March 2003, and it seemed extremely important to show the film on that day for all the reasons that we don't need to discuss. And the only cinema that would even entertain the idea, of course, was the Garden Cinema, and it's now a crucial part of the rapidly failing and collapsing ecology of cinema in London. So we're hugely grateful to George for taking on this screening, and this is just the preview, of course, of the film following its success last year, but also, of course, in advance of its release in September of this year. There are going to be obviously lots of practical questions, there are technical questions, there are all sorts of questions that we could ask about this incredible film. Many of those answers you will find on the website, ourriverourskyfilm.com. I'm going to ask very few questions at the front of this because, as Maysoon said at the beginning, it's very much about the responses to the film. The conversation around such a film is absolutely critical, of course, not least because the country that we're watching the film in was responsible for the invasion that led to the carnage and the catastrophe that we see on screen. So we need to remember that, of course, and to my knowledge, I'm sure within the Iraqi community in London there are many events and commemorations tonight, but in the wider cultural sphere, I'm aware of no other events tonight. I'm ready and willing, I would be delighted to be corrected on that fact, but I'm aware of no other events in London today within the cultural or the wider public sphere to mark the anniversary, the 20th anniversary of the invasion and arguably the destruction of Iraqi society. So we're very, very pleased to be making a small acupuncture point in that silence and that denial with this incredible film. We all have our own responses to this anniversary, this marking, I'm sure, and many Iraqis in the audience will have much more personal reasons to mark this than I will. I declare an interest in absolutely a partisan way. I've known Maysoon for many years and have been aware of this film from its idea through to this screening tonight, but I've also been in Iraq in May 2002 with Emma in the front row. We were there on an anti-sanctions brigade, and being in Baghdad and Basra and Fallujah in May 2002, many, many months before the so-called invasion, the sky knew what was coming and everybody in the country knew what was coming, and it was without question the most haunting experience of my life. So I have a skin in the game, as they say, but nothing like any Iraqis have, as we have seen this film show so powerfully. So Maysoon, if I could just start, there are many, many questions and I want the audience to ask most of them. But when did the idea come to you to move from documentary to fiction, and when did you choose 2006 as the pivot point for your story?
I needed to make this film and to deal with 2006 and 2006-07. Well, what? It is on. Is it on? It is on. Okay, so I'm not holding it right. I'm really bad at this. Anyway, in 2006-07, I was shooting a documentary film which was documenting a women's photography project, Iraqi women's photography project, and Eugenie Dolberg, who's sitting there, was the person who was leading this whole project and invented it. And in that, they were learning about how to take photographs, about photography, but they were also telling their life stories to each other by drawing these big sort of maps, charts of their life. And you start with a sort of lifeline, and then everything was okay, and then my dad died and things hit the bottom, and then this happened and that, and it was an incredible experience. And my job was just to sort of document the whole project, and I could feel that the people who were listening to, I mean, each person got up in front of all the other participants, and told their story over a period of weeks. And I could tell that what was happening was the people weren't listening with their ears, they were listening with their own stories that they were constructing at the same time. And it was at this time, it was during 2006-07, when hideous things were going on, and as you've seen, and before that, I'd been part of a women's group of Iraqis and non-Iraqi British people here, of which Emma was part also, and we were very much in contact with women's groups and so forth in Iraq, and so heard about everything that was going on, and we're collecting stories. And so I felt that out of my experience of the photography project and the people I met there, and just all the stories that I heard, and the stories from the students in the free of charge film training center that we'd set up in Baghdad 2004. All of that came together, and I thought, this has got to be told, because I had come out of the Gulf War in 91 watching television 24 hours a day and watching smart bombs fall on what seemed to be a completely empty country, because there was not one ordinary Iraqi person on the screen talking about what was going on. And it made me realize at that point how much easier that made it for people to accept the war, because the bombs weren't falling on anybody, and they weren't us, there was no identification. So I decided I had to do this, and I decided I couldn't do it as a documentary, and needed to do it as fiction, because I think in fiction you can go beneath the surface of things in a more intimate way than you can doing with a documentary, which is more, in my case anyway, the kind of documentary I make is more observational at a sight distance. So that was the trigger for it. I just felt it had to be made. I had a responsibility to make this film, because I've often said, and in front of people, that I'm like a person who lives on a bridge between here and there, and maybe I can see this side of the river more clearly than the people over here can see that side of the river, so I can talk about this side of the river to these people and vice versa. I'm that kind of conduit, and I felt I had to really use that in this instance.
Thank you very much. I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, the key strategy of the film, if you like, is to show the lives that are just hidden behind the word casualties in every newspaper column, in newspaper inches. But that is without question, an extraordinary achievement in its own terms. But to build up, in a filmic sense, an ensemble portrait of a whole community, a whole society, in the way that you have done, is really something else altogether. So how did you start to write the project? And you obviously have a co-writer. And just give us a little sense in the time we have of how you then started to bring this film into the world.
Well, it was a thing of finding the characters. And there was never going to be a central story and a central character to it. It was always going to be this kind of ensemble thing, and a fragmented story. And an image that I've talked about before is that Iraq to me at that point was like a mirror that you dropped, and it shattered into 1,000 pieces, and you could stick the pieces all together if you didn't lose any of them and get the original shape, but it's fractured. And I felt that the story had to be told in that way, that it was completely wrong to tell a kind of singular story, and so that was the way. That was one of the difficulties of raising any money to make this film. Is people were saying, "Well, who's the main character?" And I was going, "They're all the main character," and so that's how that came about. And so we started to sort of slowly write the stories, and Irada, my co-writer in Baghdad, she had stopped being able to write, like Sarah, stopped being able to write, and she was a novelist and a short story writer. But all she could do, she told me, was to go out when she went taking her child to school or going to get the groceries or whatever. She would just overhear and see small stories being enacted, and she would just write down verbatim everything that she saw. And then she just gave me all these notes. So I extracted stuff from those notes and from all the stories I'd heard from the students we were teaching in Baghdad and the women's groups we were in touch with. So that happened.
Thank you very much. I mean, we should obviously acknowledge the many talents in the room, not least Jonathan, who shot the film, and Alexander, who I think has come from France today to be with us, who edited the film. Absolutely critical roles. Thank you both very much indeed for being here. And I think we should give them a round of applause. Thank you. Yes. And I'm going to say it now, they are available for questions, I hope, if the microphone can stretch that far. I think it's fair to say the film took many years to make, and there were major leaps forward at certain points, and senses of support and backing, and then incredible setbacks. I'm very interested and moved by the fact that you show an incredible number of logos at the beginning of the film to show how many people were involved in it. And similarly, one of the very few films I can recall seeing in recent years where the length of the credits actually are needed and deserved. Those people were not just hanging around. Yeah. So again, just once you had this script, and you've said obviously already, you've hinted at some of the challenges, how did you start to build that production? And also just give us a sense of where you filmed, because it wasn't all obviously in Iraq.
It was all in Iraq.
It was all in Iraq.
All of that was
I thought
you
shot in Jordan some of the time.
No, we were thinking of shooting in Jordan at a certain point, but we didn't. It was going to cost way too much. We found places where we could shoot. No, we shot in Slemania in Kurdistan. This is where the street was, the neighborhood, and Baghdad, where the river was, basically.
Incredible.
We did, yeah.
But as we said just earlier, it took many years. You had what appeared to be a significant breakthrough, which Kate Blanchett was partly involved in, I think.
Well, the first, we applied. There was a sort of prize being given at the Dubai Film Festival, and we qualified, so we bunged it in, and that was the first thing we did. And we actually won it. We won the prize, which was $100,000, which was a huge amount for us at that point. And the head of the jury was Kate Blanchett, and she gave the prize to me. And I heard later on that people had wanted to do a sort of buddy movie about 4 guys who drive from Abu Dhabi to Beirut and get into adventures and everything. And Kate Blanchett just said, "Are you kidding? We're not doing that. We're doing this one." And so she was a very big part of us getting the prize. So, and that was the beginning for us.
But this is also obviously a women's-led project as well, and I think it's the first women's international co-production with Iraq.
That's right.
The first film of any kind that's been made in that way. And so you're breaking all sorts of thresholds, moving across borders in all sorts of ways. And the film was made. We can obviously we'll hear more questions about that, I'm sure, shortly. And then it starts to circulate, of course, right? And it circulates within the Iraqi community and within the larger Arab world. And how easy has it been to get the film out to this date so far?
In that part of the world?
No, I mean just generally. How has the reception been in the screenings you've had, which have been international?
Actually, I've been surprised by the how positive the reactions have been and how interested people have been. And we had one of my favorite screenings is the one we had in Lyon at the Institut Lumière, where the Lumière brothers actually, invented film. And it was a packed audience. It was a Sunday afternoon. And it was, everybody stayed. They stayed to talk about it afterwards. And then we went out into the lobby, and people were sort of just clutching at me and talking about it and asking questions. And Alexandre's nieces and nephews came, and they had watched the whole film. And so I was quite bowled over by those things. And we had another screening in France that was really was great, was at the Institut du Monde Arabe, the Institute of the Arab World. It's a big sort of, and that was a huge, it was, we walked in and there was like 500 people in the audience. It was extraordinary. And that was an interesting Q&A and everything afterwards. So I was quite, just joyous that actually it was getting through to people, and people had things to say about it. And then since then, it's been shown in the States, in the Arab Film Festival in San Francisco, and people wrote to me. People found my email and wrote to me from there. And people were saying, we were sitting there and we couldn't move. I couldn't move afterwards, and then I started to reflect on our country's involvement in this thing, and it's because people, I think, it seems to be in the US are much more aware of Iraq and the damage, the catastrophic business of it, and because I think there's a strong veterans movement, the veterans, because they chucked all their medals back and all of that. Yeah. So I mean, from that point of view, and recently I've had a couple of screenings in universities in the States, and I've done online Q&As afterwards, and then people have written me essays. They've sent essays to me, and then they've sent me a whole slew of questions, and I've answered them. So I'm actually in contact with. So all of that has been great.
And we should say, thank you. We should say, of course, just this Saturday, just 2 days ago, you went to Germany and won a prize there, which was, I believe, an olive tree.
It is, yes. It's
an actual tree.
It's actual trees. How to get it here is a bit of a problem.
Yeah, I mean, with the postage here at the moment, I mean, let's hope it survives. Yeah. Yes. But you've got an actual tree and a very, very strong response in Germany for that prize screening, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, yes, we did.
I mean, the word is out. That was an incredibly swift and very superficial on my part, I think, set of questions just to launch the landscape, which I'm now directing towards you, the landscape of questions, that is, of course. It would be wonderful, as Maysoon said, please, to hear from any or all of you. Do I say that? Do I really mean that? All of you? But certainly a lot of you, swiftly, concisely, and insightfully. Please, if you would like to respond to the film, it doesn't have to be a question, it can just be a comment, of course. Yes, please. Thank you. Please do. The major filming going on here, just to my right over here. Incredible archive of films being built up by the Garden Cinema. Yes, please. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that. That was amazing. It's quite loud, isn't it? Sorry. I had a question about the music, kind of like the role of music in the film, and you see things being switched off and kind of how that adds to the colour of things. Like, it's quite a muted poster, like colours wise, and also Fuga Nachal, like being played in when they're getting falafel, and then at the end as well, kind of the significance of that. Like, if you'd be able to talk about that.
Well, Fuga Nachal, which means at the top of the palm tree, is the Iraqi song. It's been around since 1923 or something like that, and it's yes, so we used it quite a few times. A folk song, basically. And then there was a completely different, and there was a composer who did the boat ride music, Khiyam Alami, and which I like very much. And then there was somebody who wrote the music in the cafe before the explosion, and also at the very end before Fuga Nachal comes in again. But when it just goes, you have the sandstorm, the sound of the sandstorm, and it goes quiet, and then there's a sort of thing of music comes up, and over the dedication to the Iraqi youth. That was written by Mario Schneider, who is German and was brought in by the German co-production. But I'm not a big fan of you have a dialogue scene and then you need to schmaltz it up a bit, and so you bang music, and then I don't do that. I don't really like that much. So it's very particular music.
Because at the beginning there was so much silence, and then having like it dubbed in, it seemed really kind of selective, and kind of that was what I was just sort of why
And the music, the Christmas music, like Silent Night and Ya Maryam and all of that was important for that character.
Thank you very much. Is there a microphone was put here? Yep. Anyone else? Anyone else towards the back? It's hard to see into the darkness, but it would be great to hear comments. Just while we're waiting for those, I was very struck, Maysoon, by the fact that you open the whole film with a map, an image of a map, because arguably, of course, the British involvement in map making in the Middle East is what's led to all this in the first place. So there was a direct.
I'm glad you said that, Gareth.
Yeah, I think I'm able to actually. I take full responsibility for that comment as well. But in a way, that is the origin. I mean, we could, the past is always with us, of course, as Faulkner said, and many others live every day. But the making of a map and then the implications of that are just a brilliantly concise way, as so many other images in the film also are, of just gathering these thoughts together into something richly visual and experiential, I think. And of course, Sarah's character does that. when did you start to kind of build these characters into larger stories? Because everything is so suggestive, as you said about the music just now. Exactly when a lesser film would give us the full scene, you cut away, and that's really important. We have the implications of other scenes. Things are happening off in a way that they wouldn't in other films. But I was very touched by the fact that the professor is going to Syria because he's going to have a better situation over there.
Yes, hearing it at this point in his,
it's just staggering. Yes, of course, absolutely staggering.
Well, when we did the photographic project, we did that in Damascus because it was safe for people to be there, and people came from Iraq, from 5 different cities, and we all lived in an old courtyard house in the old part of town. And so you think that was a place of refuge at the time. It's just like,
How did you, on the ground in Baghdad and obviously elsewhere in Iraq, how did you work? How did you set these scenes up? And of course, crucially, how did you find your incredible cast?
How long have you got?
Well, we've clearly got quite a while given the audience response at the moment. So I think let's
Yes.
hear from you. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, how did we work? Well, when we were in Slemania, we had a crew that spoke 5 languages. And so Jonathan, who's sitting there and spoke English, his camera crew spoke Farsi and Kurdish, and the lighting crew spoke only Arabic. And somehow it worked. It worked, and the sound department was French. So it was. It was pretty interesting, and actually, it was great. It was really great to. There was a time when Jonathan he got really fed up because he was trying to explain about shooting from the top of a ladder, a very high ladder, and how to get the where to put the camera up there and all this kind of stuff. And finally you got fed up, I think, Jonathan, didn't you? And you said, I'll do it. And he went up there and everybody was, no, you can't do that. And anyway, we got through it. And the actors are mostly Iraqi, some in the diaspora. They the guy who played the taxi driver, Basim, he lives in Sweden. The baker, Karim, lives in here, and Darina Sarah lives in who's not Iraqi, she's Lebanese. She lives in France, for example, and the boatman lived in Berlin, Ali, and except he now lives in Barcelona. And Dijla, the sister of the cab driver, this taxi driver, she is in Berlin as well. But they're all of Iraqi origin, with the exception of Darina, Sarah.
And so, what was their sense? Depending on how long they had been out of Iraq, what was their sense of returning to make such a work?
Well, it was various. Basim, the taxi driver, went back and forth to Baghdad several times. He hadn't gone and just left, but just sort of. Raya, who was the production designer and also played the woman in the missing persons office, whose son is found and can't read. She had to sort of take that part quickly because somebody who was going to play it didn't show up, so she just did it. And she's not an actor. She's so. She had to leave to Sweden with her son also. But, as soon as the son was settled and he had got through high school, she came back to Baghdad. And so, it was something for all of them. But Dijla, the Maryam Abbas, who was living in Berlin, as I said, she hadn't been there since she was 12 years old. And her father had been kidnapped during this period, 2006, and it's quite a story, So, and she didn't come to Baghdad, but because all her scenes were shot in Slemania, but it was extraordinary for her to be back in Iraq.
Given everything you've said about the experience of returning, and of course the stories that have surrounded people's lives. One of the great strains of the film, the kind of approaches, is the humour, of course, which I'm sure comes direct from the street and from experiences and stories people have told, whether it's the scene on the bus or Sarah's stories. Give us a sense of that daily resilience that people inevitably have to have. I mean, when you step out the door in the morning, you might not see the door in the evening. You know, what was your sense of that, having been away from the country, and how people literally just find a way to deal with catastrophe on a daily basis?
Well, I mean, this business of the jokes was really present at the time. It became a kind of joke factory. Iraq, and during this time, and the dog one, for example, I heard that a lot, and I thought, and it is resistance. It's actually resistance to the damage all around you, the music, the singing, the and the jokes. That was because actually you have to do this business of renew a sort of fragile hope every morning to get yourself out the door, to do what you need to do, to take your kids to school, to whatever, and because if you don't, it's just despair, and then you're gone. And I think, and Iraq, you know, it's a turbulent place. I mean, there's been a lot of wars recently, but also, you know, civilizations have risen and fallen to the ground, and they're rebuilt. And I mean, during the sanctions, which were murderous. I mean, the sanctions on Iraq were of some of the most punitive in history. And, you know, many people died as a result of, you know, the lack of medicines or the lack of clean water, all kinds of stuff. But during that time of the sanctions, people kept making art, although they couldn't get, painters couldn't get oil paints or canvas or anything, but they kept making things, and people kept writing poetry, and they would smuggle things because the government was problematic, so they would smuggle things, and you'd get things kind of photostated and moved around between people. So there is this thing in Iraq of and now, I mean, I was there this time last year, and I was in Mosul. Well, Mosul was, I mean, it's a beautiful old city, and it was completely damaged because it was taken over by ISIS, and then the getting rid of ISIS really reduced the old city to rubble, you know, by the bombing and so forth. So, and you walk through this thing, and it's just grief. It's incredible, and so. But then. The person I was with said, actually, my sister's getting married today, so come to the wedding. So we go to this restaurant, and it's all, you know, it's people having a very good time in spite of all this. And everywhere people were setting up galleries and you know, art schools, and there were communal meeting places and all that kind of stuff. That kind of thing is going on in Iraq now. People are building.
Thank you very much indeed. Questions here? Yeah, we've got one here, and then we'll come forward. Thank you very much. Yes, please.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to know. Hi. I just wanted to know if this film was screened to an Iraqi audience who have lived there at that time in Iraq, and what was their opinion of it.
Yes, last March it was screened in Iraq as part of a Franco-Arab film festival, and so it was screened in the French Institute and also in a couple of cinemas there. And in the Q&A, when it was at one of the venues where we screened it, somebody raised their hand, a young man raised his hand, and he said, "Were you here in 2006? And I said, "No, I wasn't here in 2006. And actually, in my long life, I've only spent about 4 years of my life in Iraq when I was a child." And I said, "Why are you asking this question?" And he said, "Because those of us who lived through this period would probably make a different film." And I said, "Of course, that's true, that they would make a different film." And I think a film that was made there, it was much more concentrating on the violence. I wasn't interested in showing, you know, body parts and you know, blood on the streets. But people were concentrated with that because that's what they were having to deal with every day. I don't think I said to her, "I'm making this film from a certain distance, but who were in the middle of it, have a different position, a different place. But they liked it. I mean, they liked the film. One guy came up to me and said, I liked the film, but there's a word you used I didn't like. And I thought, what could this be? He said, we're not dogs. We, the Iraqis, are not dogs. I said, no, you're not dogs. I said, no, you're not dogs. I'm Iraqi, you're Iraqi. We're not dogs, and it was just I said it's a joke that I actually didn't write. That joke was everywhere. You heard it everywhere, And so it was just a very po-faced reaction to that, but
Thank you very much. There was a question here, and then we'll come. Yeah, there's two. Thank you.
Maysoon, as an ex-documentary director, which part of the process of making this film did you enjoy the most? And secondly, following on from that, they're connected. What's your next film going to be about?
Thank you.
Well, what part? What, as a documentary film director, what part did I enjoy the most? Or, it was the variety of people that were there and the commitment. I had the crew was incredible, the cast were incredible. People were really committed. They put everything in. When something went wrong, or there was characters, for example, that had been cast 2 years before they were going to be actually doing the shooting, who called up the night before and said, I'm not going to be there. So, for example, the people smuggler in the car with all the rain, that person is somebody who actually works at Western Union. Has nothing to do with acting, but he likes acting. He likes watching acting. And the guy who was cast to play that role said he didn't want to do it because he'd had a look and it was too small a part. So, because it only had one scene. And so it was, and we were in Kurdistan at this point where there's a lot of people who don't speak Arabic. And so the head of production had gone to Western Union to collect the cash to pay people because, of course, we couldn't open a bank account there because it was the time of ISIS. You couldn't open a bank account in Iraq and bring foreign money into it. Money from abroad into it. So every couple of days, we had to go to Western Union and pick up the cash to pay people. So the head of production, Hassan, came back and I said, I have this problem and we have to shoot this because the person he's playing the scene with has got to leave tomorrow. And he said, well, I don't know, but there's this young man at Western Union and this is what he looks like. This is my phone. I took a picture of him. And he says he likes acting. I said, has he done any acting? He said to me, no, I don't think so. So he came and we had a talk and he told me an extraordinary story about why he liked acting, which I'm not going to we don't have time to repeat. But we started to work on the scene 9 o'clock after we finished shooting that day. And I just had a feeling about him. I thought he can do this. He can do this. He was very responsive stuff. So I just went the next day early and we sat in the car and did the scene. And I said to him, look, I'm a documentary filmmaker most of the time. I don't really know a lot about acting, but I know sometimes when people are just beginning, they think all the drama is in them or is in the other person there, but it's actually in this space between us. That's as I understand it. And so, I think he did a great job. And there were a few moments like that. And when they worked out, it was like a miracle. So I thought, there is somebody looking out for us here. Because Abu Haidar, the drunk man, who's he's one of the biggest actors in Iraq. He's very well known and very well loved. But he wasn't who I originally cast. I cast somebody else in it. And that person had a heart attack and had to go to Istanbul to get triple bypass surgery 2 days before we were going to start shooting with him. So I had to find that character again because for me, he was a very pivotal one. We happened to be in Baghdad. We came out of a cafe. We'd just been having falafel. And I was thinking, it's not easy to cast somebody of this age. So I came out, and there was Mahmoud Abu Abbas, this guy sitting at in a sort of traditional tea shop, at a pavement table, drinking his tea. And I just gritted my teeth and went and sat down. And I said, can I join you, blah. And I went, my name is blah, 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 and I have a film that we're making about this, that, and the other, and there's a character in it, and I really need to, and we have 3 days of shooting, and, like that. It was that. And I said, the character's name is Abu Haidar. He said, I'm Abu Haidar. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, because my son is called Haidar, and Abu Haidar means the father of Haidar. He said, oh, I said, okay. And I talked to him, and I said, it's a modest film, it's the budget is very tight, our time is very tight, and everything like that. And I don't know whether you would have time. He said, well, I'm here doing a soap opera, but I can sort of shift it around a bit. And he said, I've been waiting for 5 years for you to ask me to be in this film. and I went, how? Why? And he said, because you forgot. We met in Dubai when you won the prize for the thing, and we had a bit of a talk about the film that you were thinking of making. And I thought, she'll call me sometime. And I said, well, I never imagined that somebody of your status would be in a film like this. When I say tight budget, he said, oh, I don't give a damn about that. So he was like an angel. He was incredible. He came on. He's a very big-hearted person. And the crew just loved him, and he stayed with us for 3 days in Baghdad. So.
And who did you enjoy working with most, him or the guy who had never acted before?
Both. both for different reasons. Yes.
Thank you very much. We do need to come to the other question. I know the second question hasn't been answered yet, but we'll come to that in a minute. Yeah. Would you like to come, please, and then we'll come to you. Yeah. Thank you. Just here. Yeah. Thanks a lot.
My question actually follows on from that. I was going to ask you about your approach to directing actors. You spoke at the beginning of the Q&A about how, as a documentarist, your approach has been very observational on the outside, and you were attracted to fiction for this project because it allows you to dig beneath the surface and be more intimate. So how did you achieve that? I mean, when you work with actors, how do you achieve that? And also, as a documentarist of the projects that you've done, you've spent a lot of time with your characters, and you really care for them. So in what ways is this process similar or different from your approach to directing documentary?
Well, I think my documentary filmmaking is present in this film. I mean, it informs a lot of it. I mean, it's and that's when we were raising money. That's one of the things that people had a problem with. They said, "You want to make a documentary film?" I said, "No, I don't, actually." But it certainly informs my thing because it's sort of, and I can't claim to any sort of technique of directing actors. So I'm not experienced in it at all. But the actors themselves helped a lot. So I just and the thing is that I have a thing of trying to look beneath the surface. I mean, whether it's in a documentary film, we're just standing on a street corner waiting to cross, and there are people around you, and you see somebody make a gesture, and you think, I wonder what is going on here. What's happened in her life that she's doing this now. That sort of stuff goes through my head all the time, and I think it's a thing that comes from living in cities where there are a lot of people, where you're in amongst people all the time. I'm always wondering about the people I'm sitting across the tube from, for example, or whatever. So that applies also to the fictional characters, which I'd written, and the backstories and everything for them, all of that. But the actors obviously brought something else to it, and so we just explored that together. But I mean, our time was very tight, actually, and so there is much more in-depth work we could have done. We didn't have any rehearsal time. That was a problem, and I had really been planning for that. At least to have, at least 2 weeks of rehearsal, but we didn't have anything.
Thank you very much. Yeah, a question here.
Yeah, thank you. Given that it's an extraordinary sort of portrayal of trauma. It was really haunting. But I just kind of, again, one of the sort of haunting aspects of it was just how little finger pointing there was, and that you don't really see. You don't see you hear the helicopters, but you don't really see Americans. You hear references to them, and the people who you do sort of see as the perpetrators are much more Iraqi rather than American. And I wonder whether that was how you felt about the episodes of sort of 2006. And then just if you were to make a sequel, would it be as bleak as Our River, Our Sky? A sequel being kind of like in Iraq today.
Thank you.
I mean, yes, the Americans were not foremost in my mind in 2006. I mean, it was the militias, the sectarian war that was going on, and the militias, and the corrupt politics, and that was in my mind much more. I thought, well, I'm not interested in the Americans now anymore. They've done their bit. The wreckage that they've left behind is this. Yeah, so I mean that's and I wasn't actually interested in really investigating the perpetrators of the violence either. I was much more focused on all of this is happening, but what are people doing with it? I mean, how are they dealing with it? I don't know if that answers your question.
A little bit. I mean, I would just wonder whether I wonder whether you're trying to hold up a mirror to Iraqis and just say, and try and get Iraqis to take responsibility to some extent for their own fate.
Yeah, well, yes, and actually, I what I got very much a sense of when I was talking to the students at the film school and all this, that people were looking in the mirror and going, "Is this us? We're doing this?" And that I heard a lot, and I felt it very much there. Myself, people sort of began not to recognize themselves, certainly not to recognize their society, but not to recognize themselves in it. So, I mean, that's, yeah, it was a mirror to Iraqis. Yes, it was, because who was doing it? Was, I mean, in 2006, it was mostly, well, it was a sectarian war, but there was all of Al Qaeda in Iraq before that, as well, which was, once the Americans invaded, then Al Qaeda was welcome. I mean, it would be different. It wouldn't be placed at this time. It would be now. But there are other lasting damage that has happened, especially in the south of the country, where it was carpet bombed with depleted uranium-tipped weapons, for example. And in terms of just the environmental damage, it's been huge in Iraq. So people are living with all of that. So, but nevertheless, there is this kind of spirit of fighting back, in a way.
Thank you very much. We'll take the last question here, and just to say that if everyone heard the follow-up comments about Iraqis taking responsibility and what the film would be now if it was made. Thank you.
Hi, it's not a question, it's a comment. I think you delivered a strong message to everybody that Iraqis, they are united despite they are Christian, Muslim, Shia or Sunnis. War created blood. At that time, you cannot see even a bird in the sky. And I still remember those days. But thank you, delivered this message. And the second message, that the Iraqis, they like art. Mm-hmm. They like classics. Mm-hmm. They like to live. They are fighters. Mm. We fight for our country, our culture, despite war, blood, kidnapping, bombs. This is a big thank you, Maysoon.
Tamam. Shukran.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm very struck by those comments, and also, of course, by the question that the film offers us as well about the role of culture. Sarah and her stories, and the inability to write stories that the professor challenges. So the film asks its own question and answers it, of course, with its own achievement about what culture can do in such appalling stories and situations. We all know the huge demonstrations that happened globally, of course, a month or so before the invasion, and we all ask ourselves, what did they do? Did they achieve nothing? And we remember what Kissinger and Nixon were plotting in Vietnam, and how they stepped back from further action because of the mass demonstrations in the early 70s. So we have to ask ourselves, what would have happened if those demonstrations had not taken place in February? But a film like this, of course, reminds us, as Maysoon said so eloquently earlier, that everything is an act of resistance. Ironing and folding a shirt can be, making bread, making a cake, reading a story. And I think we've lost sight of that in Britain, among British people to a certain degree, that all sorts of resistance takes place all the time. As long as you're aware of it and you join up and you speak together and work together, then of course it takes a very different form from simply being folding and ironing a shirt. I'm also struck, as many of you will have perhaps recognised, not a reference as such, but an echo of a story by Ghassan Kanafani, who, the Palestinian writer who was assassinated by Mossad, wrote a story called Letter from Gaza, where he asked the question, would you leave the country? Will you stay in the country? You can find that story, if you only speak English, read by John Berger online, Letter from Gaza. But I think, Maysoon, you answered that question amazingly, why people would stay in Iraq through all the horror. I'd like to thank you for the film. Please find more details about the film online, Our River, Our Sky, film.com. Many thanks to Johnny Tull and Tull Stories for distributing the film in the UK. That will happen in late September. Please spread the word about that. But before you do any of that, please thank Alexandra, Jonathan and Maysoon Pachachi for Our River, Our Sky. Thank you very much.